Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about the second part of the reading comprehension part of the exam, and that is the sentence completion. Now we can divide sentence completion into two main categories, the single blank and the double blank. Let's talk about the single blank first. Sentence completion questions always have the same process when it comes to answering them. It doesn't matter if they're single blank or if they're double blank. Obviously, when it comes to double blank, we're going to change the process just a little bit. But ultimately, this is a test of how much vocabulary you know. And I suggest you watch the videos I already uploaded on vocabulary in order to do well on this section. The first clue, or the first thing that we should know. Before looking at the answer choices, what is the first word that comes to your head and makes most sense to you? Now the question in this part of the section is going to be given as a sentence with a blank. Before you look at the answers that are given, think, what word makes the most sense? Even block out the answer choices if you have to so that you don't distract yourself. This is important. This will give you a really important basis with which to get the correct answer. Always think what word goes in here before you even look at the answer choices. So let's look at an example question. At the reunion, Rick thought his now charming cousin was the direct blank of his former self. At the reunion, Rick thought his now charming cousin, now what's important in this part? Now charming, that's important, was the direct blank of his former self, and former. So these are important words. Now charming, direct blank, and former self. What this indicates is that there is an opposite relationship going on here. Because at the reunion, Rick thought that his cousin, which is now charming, was the direct blank of his former self. That means that the direct blank of his former self had to be the opposite of charming. So think, what is a word that indicates an opposite relationship? And then look at the answer choices, because before you look at the answer choices, you already have a clue as to what the relationship of the word is going to be. Our answer choices are the following: remnant, antithesis, consequence, extremity, and mainstay. It would be great if you knew what all of these meant, but it's not necessary for you to know what all of these mean. All you have to know is the relationship that makes the most sense. And we already determined that the relationship is going to be an opposite one. Now, antithesis, simply by judging with the prefix, indicates an opposite relationship. Remnant indicates what's left over. Consequence doesn't make any sense here at all. Extremity also doesn't make any sense. And mainstay doesn't make any sense either. Therefore, antithesis is the only thing that fits here. So we go back and we plug it in and we read it with the blank now filled. At the reunion, Rick thought his now charming cousin was the direct antithesis of his former self. What does that mean? We can translate it like this. At the reunion, Rick thought his now charming cousin was the direct opposite of his former self. And that makes sense. So again, before you look at the answer choices given, think of a word yourself that makes the sentence make sense. Let's continue. The second thing that you have to remember is that the correct answer will rephrase most of the question given. This is true for sentence completion and for reading comprehension. The answer that is most correct is the answer that most mimics the question. For example, imagine that the question was the following. The Italian road was very blank. It twisted back and forth along the lines of the hillside. So we are going to be looking for a word that most paraphrases or rephrases the question given. So what are we going to rephrase here? Well, the part that we're going to rephrase is the part that defines this missing sentence. How do we know it's going to be a definition? Because it's going to have this colon. Remember, every time that you have a colon, what follows after the colon is going to be the definition of the word. And our definition is this: twisted back and forth along the lines of the hillside. So we have to think of a word that means more or less twisting back and forth along the lines of the hillside. Then we look at the answer choices. Remember, we don't look at the answer choices first. We only look at the answer choices after we come up with something on our own. Panoramic, precipitous, serpentine, circumscribed, retrograde. Again, you don't have to know what these mean. You only have to know their relationship. Panoramic means scenic, precipitous means dangerous, serpentine means in a snake-like manner, circumscribed, I have no idea what that means, and retrograde means sort of old style or old-fashioned. Now, even I don't know what circumscribed means, and I'm going to look it up after this video, but I don't really have to know what circumscribed means, because I know that serpentine, because of the prefix serpent, makes the most sense here. It twisted back and forth along the lines of the hillside. Close your eyes for a minute and imagine a hillside. Now imagine a road twisting back and forth along the hillside. Doesn't that look sort of like a snake? To me, it does. So the correct answer here is serpentine. So again, what did we do here? Well, before we looked at the answer choices, we imagined or we thought of the relationship between the parts of the question. And the relationship here was a definition relationship because we have the colon. So we have to think of a word that means twisted back and forth. And we know that a serpent is twisted back and forth. What's another important thing here? You should always mark or highlight or underline keywords, because ultimately this comes down to figuring out relationships. And marking and highlighting and underlining keywords is going to save you a lot of time when you try to determine these relationships. The following words indicate relationships: not, unlike, and although. The relationships that these words indicate is opposite relationships. So remember, you have the words not, unlike, and although in a question that indicates an opposite relationship between the parts of the question. Although the wind was strong, the ocean was not very blank. So we have the word here not, and we have the word here although. So the relationship between the wind and the ocean is going to be an opposite relationship. Although the wind was strong, the ocean was not very powerful. That's one word that makes sense here. I came up with this question, so I didn't give it any answers. But the wind has to be related to the ocean in an opposite kind of way. So although it was strong, the ocean was not very powerful. And we have two negatives here. We have although and not. If we only had one negative, if I got rid of not, and we had although the wind was strong, the ocean was very powerful, we understand that the relationship between wind and ocean is an opposite relationship. The ocean was very calm. That's what makes sense here the most, because we have an opposite relationship between wind and ocean, and we know this because of the word although. Now, if we have not, we have the word not in here, we know that the relationship is going to be a direct relationship, because if you remember, two negatives cancel each other out. A double negative is just a single positive. Although the wind was strong, the ocean was not very strong. Okay? Unlike his friend, Nick did not do his homework because Nick was blank. So we have the word unlike, we have the subject Nick, and we have the subject friend. So we have unlike, which is tying somehow Nick and friend together. So we have to figure out Well, let me ask you. Someone that does his homework can be considered responsible. Now, the relationship between Nick and friend is an opposite relationship because Nick is unlike his friend. So if his friend did his homework, that means that his friend is responsible or studious. Therefore, Nick is the opposite of responsible or studious. We can say he is irresponsible or not studious. Another one. Although many people find vocabulary difficult, Steve derives pleasure from it because he is a blank. Now, the relationship that we have here is people, many people, and Steve. These are the two things that are going to be compared or somehow tied. And the key word here is although. Now, although indicates an opposite relationship. So many people find vocabulary difficult. What is a word that indicates the opposite of finding vocabulary difficult? Well, there are many. But one that could be there is sesquipedalian, which is someone that likes big words. Next, we'll talk about